Chapter 1 Family. I was born in York, England in 1632. My father was German and my mother was English. I had two older brothers and a younger sister. The oldest brother joined the army, and he was killed in battle. The middle one disappeared, and we never heard what happened to him. I was well educated and my father wanted me to study law, but I wanted to go to sea. Nothing would make me stay at home and become a lawyer. I was 18 years old when my father called me to his room. He was old, and he suffered from an illness, which kept him in bed. My father asked me why I wanted to go to sea when I could stay at home, study and prosper in my own country. He told me that traveling by sea was dangerous. He warned me that I would lose safety and comfort of my home if I went to sea. My father also told me that if I went abroad, I could die like my oldest brother. When he was saying this, he started to cry, and he couldn't continue. My father's advice and warnings made me think, and I started to forget my desire to travel by sea. But my decision to stay home didn't last long. 1 week passed, and I decided to talk to my mother and tell her I wanted to travel. I told her how curious I was. I told her how I wanted to see the world. Then I asked her to speak to my father. I asked her to tell him to let me go on one sea journey. I promised that if I didn't like it, I would go back home and start working very hard. My mother didn't agree. She also didn't want me to go abroad. I stayed home 1 more year. The whole time I was thinking whether to follow my parents' wish or my own desire. One day in September, I was in the town of Hull. A friend of mine was going with his father's ship to London, and he invited me to go with him for free. I wasn't prepared and my parents didn't know, but I boarded that ship on that September day. The moment the ship left the river and went into the sea, my trouble started. There was strong wind and the sea was rough. A storm was approaching. I was very scared and I felt seasick. I began to regret my decision to leave home. I thought every wave was going to sink the ship. I promised myself I would go home and apologize to my parents as soon as I stepped on dry land again. The storm was over by the morning. I was still seasick during the day, and I was thinking about the terrible storm. However, the evening was beautiful, and the sea was very peaceful. One of the sailors came to me, and we started talking. He made some funny jokes. He asked me what I thought about the light wind. I told him I was very scared of the storm. The sailor offered me a drink. I got drunk, and that night I slept very well. The next day, I forgot how scared I was. I also forgot my decision to go back home. Instead, I was dreaming more about traveling by sea. The next few days, the wind was blowing against us, and we couldn't move much. 3 days later the wind increased, and we could go faster. 2. Chapter 2 Storm. The next day, there was a great storm. I was scared, and this time, I could see that the other sailors were also very scared. The captain was walking in and out of his cabin. He was quietly saying prayers. I was so scared I could only lie in my bed and hope we would survive. When I looked out of the window of my cabin, I saw the waves. They were as tall as mountains. I saw other ships which looked like toys. The waves were playing with them. One sailor shouted that a ship went underwater in front of us. I was terribly afraid, and I regretted that I didn't go home after the first light storm. The storm was getting worse, and now all the sailors were praying we would survive. Suddenly someone shouted that there was a hole in the ship and water was coming inside the ship. Everyone was called down to pump the water out. I was paralyzed with fear, and I couldn't get out of my bed. Then one man came to me and told me to go down and help. So I went. I was pumping out the water when the captain ordered someone to fire a gun. It was a signal that we were in danger. I thought we were sinking, because the ship was full of water. I thought we were all going to die. We were all working very hard, but the water kept coming into the ship. The storm wasn't as dangerous anymore, but the ship was already badly damaged. Our captain continued firing guns for help. There was a small ship in front of us, which sent us a boat. The sailors on that boat risked their lives, but managed to reach our ship. With great difficulty, we all boarded the boat. We couldn't think of going back to their ship, which was already very far. It was too dangerous. So we decided to try to get to coast instead. 15 minutes later our ship went underwater. We were safe on the boat, but I was still very afraid. We were soon close to the land, and we could see many people on the beach. They were waiting for us. When we finally reached the land, the people were very nice to us. They helped us find rooms and gave us money to get to London or go back to Hull. I decided to go to London. I traveled to London by land. The whole way I was thinking what to do and where to go. I was too ashamed of myself to go back home. In London, I met the captain of another ship who often traveled to the coast of Africa. He offered me to travel with him. Before we left London, he advised me what to buy for trade in Africa. At that time, I only had 40 pounds. This journey was successful because I returned to England with some gold which was worth almost 300 pounds. The journey was also good for me because the captain taught me something about mathematics and navigation. I learned what was necessary to become a sailor and a businessman. Soon after we came back to England, the captain died. I decided to make the same journey to Africa with the same ship but another captain. This journey started well. But soon we had big problems. A ship started chasing us. It was a pirate ship. It continued the whole day. At about 3 in the afternoon, the pirates came very close. There was an attack, but we managed to push them away. On the second attempt, many of their men came on the ship, and they started destroying everything. Some of our sailors were killed and some were injured, so we had to give up. All of us were taken prisoners. 3. Chapter 3. Woman. I was young and strong. I became a slave to the captain of the pirates. I felt very sad. I was hoping the captain would take me with him when he went to sea, and when a Spanish or a Portuguese captain attacked him, I could be free. But this didn't happen because the captain left me to look after his garden every time he went to sea. One day, I met a young woman in the house. She was so beautiful. She was also a slave, and she cleaned the house. I tried to speak to her, but she didn't speak my language. But I felt that she understood me. I liked her very much. She was very attracted to me. Anytime she saw me, she always smiled at me. Sometimes she touched me when she was close to me, but it was only a short moment. If the captain saw it, he could send her away. She was on my mind very often. I wanted to meet her every day, but she wasn't in the house every day. When I thought of her, I felt a nice feeling in my heart. I knew I fell in love with that woman. But our relationship was complicated. We couldn't be officially together. Slaves couldn't have relationships. It was so sad. Sometimes when the captain went fishing, he took me and a boy to help him. Sometimes he even sent me and the boy with one of his relatives fishing in a small boat. One morning when we were fishing, thick fog came and we were lost. We struggled to reach the coast the whole day and the following night, but it was only the next morning that we finally got back. After this adventure, the captain decided to use a bigger boat, the one from our English ship, and make it more comfortable. It had a cabin in the middle of it, and it had good sailing equipment. One day the captain ordered me to put extra food, drinks, and guns on the boat because he was expecting some important guests to join him for fishing. They also wanted to do some hunting later. However, the guests refused the offer at the last moment. Then, the captain told me, "Prepare the boat for fishing for the next day." This was my opportunity to run away. A lot of guns and food were on the boat. I prepared the boat for fishing as usual, but I left the guns and food on the boat. The next day I could run away. This was my plan. I thought about the young woman. I wanted to take her with me, but I didn't know how to do it. It wasn't possible to take her on the boat. I was sad as I didn't know what to do. I wanted to be free, but my heart wanted to be with her. Then the morning came. I hoped that I could see the young woman in the house. I couldn't leave without seeing her for at least a short moment. Then I saw her. She was the most beautiful woman in my life. When I looked at her, our eyes met. She knew something was wrong. Maybe she understood that was our last moment together. She looked deeply in my eyes. Then she touched my hand. Her face was sad, and my face was sad too. She smiled at me a little. Then she went away. This was the last moment I saw her. 1 hour later, we were ready. I and the boy went to the boat. One of the captain's relatives went with us. He was our boss for that day. Soon, we were far from the land. I pretended that I couldn't catch fish. Then our boss told us to go further from the land. He thought we could catch fish there. 4. Chapter 4. Lion. At one moment our boss went to the front of the boat, and I quickly pushed him to the sea. He tried to swim back to us. I took one of the guns and pointed it at him. I told him to swim back to the coast if he wanted to live. After he swam away, I turned to the boy and asked him to promise that he would be faithful to me. He did as I asked. After 2 years of life as a slave, I was finally free. We tried to go as fast as possible. The wind was good. We were far away from the pirate land the next day. But I was still scared of them. I didn't want to be caught again. I was so scared that I didn't let the boy stop the boat for 5 days. On the 6th day I felt safer. We took the boat close to the land. We saw a little river. I didn't know where we were. We had to stop somewhere because we needed some fresh water. We waited until it was completely dark. We wanted to swim to the beach unseen and get water. But as soon as night came, we started hearing horrible noises from the beach. The boy asked me not to go to the beach. We remained on the boat, but we couldn't sleep. 2 hours later, some animals came to wash themselves in the water. They made horrible noises. The boy was extremely scared, and me too. We were even more scared when we heard one of the animals swim to us. The boy asked me to go away. But I didn't want to go away because we needed fresh water from the river. I took one of the guns and shot at the animal. I didn't kill it, but the animal turned around, and it swam back to the beach. When the other animals heard the gun, they went away. We didn't hear the noises, but we were still scared, and we stayed on the boat until the morning. As soon as it was light again, we ate some bread for breakfast. Then we decided to go to the beach. We took our guns and 2 big bottles for the water, and we went to the beach. Once we were on the beach, I didn't want to lose sight of the boat, so the boy went alone a bit further inside the land to get some fresh water. He returned after some time. He was running. I thought that some animal was running after him. But I didn't see anything dangerous. He was hurrying to show me he killed an animal that looked like a chicken. We were both very glad because the meat was good and we found fresh water. I didn't know where exactly we were. I only knew we went around the coast of Africa. I hoped we met an English ship when we went around the coast. I thought we were in a land where nobody lived. We didn't see any people on the land. We only heard wild animals. One morning when we were going to get water, the boy showed me a big lion sleeping in the shade near us. Then the lion woke up. When he saw us, he started to run to us. We didn't have much time. The boy was so scared he wasn't able to shoot. I had 3 guns. The first bullet hit his leg. The second bullet hit its head. He was seriously injured. The third bullet finished the animal. We couldn't eat the meat because it wasn't good, but we wanted the skin. The skin was very big. We put it on top of the boat, and soon it was dry. 5. Chapter 5. Ship. For the next 10 days, we sailed close to the land. We stopped only to fill our bottles with fresh water. Soon we started to notice the land was inhabited. Several times we saw people on the beach who were watching us. I wanted to stop and go to them, but the boy asked me not to do it. But then, one group of these people looked very friendly. I waved to them. I tried to sign to the people that we needed food. They signed to me to come to the beach. 2 of them ran into the forest. They returned with some dry meat. We didn't want to approach the land, and they were too afraid to swim to us, so we didn't know how to reach the food. When the people saw this, they stepped back and were soon quite far from the food. We approached the food and took it on board. Then, we weren't scared of them. They came to us. We thanked them, but we had nothing for them. At that moment, we saw 2 animals which were running down the hill. The people were scared. One animal attacked a young girl. I shot at it, and I killed the animal. The second animal was scared and it ran away. The people were shocked when they heard the gun. They were also shocked when they saw the animal was dead. They were happy the girl was alive, and they thanked us. They brought us more food and water. On the 11th day, we saw a long piece of land which was extending very far into the sea. There were also some islands far in the sea. I was thinking about going to the islands. Then the boy shouted, "Look! There is a ship!" And really there was a ship quite far at the horizon. The boy was really scared. He thought it was a pirate ship. But I looked at the ship properly. It looked Portuguese. The ship was going away from us. Nobody on the ship saw us. So I fired a gun. They heard the gun. Then they saw us. They turned the ship and went to us. Soon we were on the Portuguese ship. They spoke Portuguese, Spanish, and French. But I didn't understand them. Fortunately, there was a Scottish sailor on the ship. He came to me. I told him our story. Then all the sailors started to be very nice to us. They agreed to take me and the boy on the ship. We were both very happy. We offered our things to the captain, but he didn't want to take them. He wanted to pay for them instead. It was very nice of him. I told him he could buy our boat, which I gave him a good price for. I asked for a half of usual price. He could take the rest of the things for free. The captain agreed. The captain also wanted to train the boy as a sailor. I didn't like this idea. I thought he was too young for this job. I thought the boy also needed freedom. He didn't need to start another service. 6. Chapter 6. Wife. But the captain said it was good for the boy. The boy wanted to work for the captain. He wanted to be a sailor. Finally, I agreed. The ship was on the way to Brazil. We arrived there after 22 days. I said goodbye to the boy and the sailors. Brazil was a new state in South America. Many people started a new life there. It was the same for me. I didn't know anybody there. Soon I met people who had sugar plantations. They became my friends. I liked Brazil very much, and soon I learnt the language. I had some money from the captain, and I bought a small land in Brazil. I started to produce sugar. I didn't produce much for the first 2 years, but then my plantation was growing fast. I was single, but my life was good. I was independent, and my financial situation improved every month. We paid only small taxes in Brazil. The society was new, and we didn't have many rules from the government. Soon I had enough money to be able to hire a lady for cleaning my house. I asked my friends if they knew about any good woman. One of my friends said, "I have a daughter who is 18 years old. I think she could work for you. She is also a very good cook." The next day his daughter came to my house. She was friendly but a little shy. She was also a very pretty girl. We talked shortly about what I needed from her. The next day she came to my house. She cleaned the dirty floor and my furniture. She took out the rubbish. She came to my house every morning on Monday and on Thursday, and she was working for 4 hours. She cleaned the house, and she also cooked for me. She gave food to my cat too, who soon started to be a little fat. I was always happy to see the girl. Sometimes we had breakfast or lunch together, and we talked. Then she was sick for a week. She couldn't come to my house. I felt a strange feeling when she wasn't in my house. I really missed her. I thought, maybe I am in love with her. 1 week later she came to my house. I was really happy to see her. I could see she was happy too. I hugged her. Then I kissed her. It was a long kiss. 2 weeks later, I went to her father's house. I asked him if I could marry his daughter. He was quiet. I was waiting for his reaction. Then he said, "I agree." I was the happiest man in the world. 2 months later, I married the daughter of my friend. We started to plan a family. This period of my life was great. We had big plans for our family and our plantation. We needed a bigger house, and we needed more money to be able to build a bigger house. I thought about the business in Africa. I knew I could make a lot of money in Africa quickly. I spoke about Africa with my friends who started to be interested in this idea. 7. Chapter 7, Hurricane. One day, 3 of my friends came to our house. They told me they wanted to go to Africa. They asked me if I wanted to go with them. I said, "Yes, I want to go with you." We started to prepare all the necessary things for the journey. Soon we were ready to go. I said goodbye to my wife, and we started our journey. Our plan was to be back in 2 months. We left Brazil on the 1st of September 1655. Our ship was very big, but we were only 17 men. The ship was full of things for business. We had cups, glass, mirrors, knives, and other products. At the beginning of our journey, the weather was very good, but very hot. In 1 week, a hurricane came, and it was threatening our ship for the next 12 days. After the hurricane passed, we saw we went quite far from our original journey, and were instead close to the northern part of Brazil near the Orinoco River. The ship was so badly damaged we could no longer go to Africa. The captain wanted us to go back and repair the ship, but I strongly disagreed with him. We went over the maps and decided the best thing to do was to go to Barbados and repair the ship there. When we started this short trip, a second hurricane came. The next morning one of the sailors cried out, "Land!" And at that moment the ship stopped in shallow water. We expected the ship to break apart at any moment because of the strong wind, so we all got into the small boat the ship carried. This was very dangerous because the 17 of us were crowded in the boat, and it had no sail. The waves were very big. The wind was extremely strong. The wind pushed us to big rocks. We knew the crash was close. Suddenly, a huge wave appeared and overturned the boat. I was covered with water and couldn't breathe. I couldn't see the others or the boat, but I saw a little beach between the rocks. Another wave carried me to the beach. I was half dead with all the water that came into my body. I was still in water, but I felt a land under my feet. I could hardly move, but I knew I had to go further onto the land. I didn't want another wave to carry me back into the sea. Before I could get to my feet, another wave came, and I was washed into the water. I couldn't breathe for a while. But then another wave threw me back on the beach. I tried to get up. I tried to go further from the sea. I was able to move 10 meters up. I was safe. But my arms and legs were very weak. I collapsed and I was lying on the beach. After some time I got up. I looked for the others. I couldn't find the other men. I was probably the only person alive. All my friends were dead. I only found 3 hats and 2 shoes on the beach. It was horrible for me. The weather was still very bad, but the waves weren't as big anymore, and I could see the ship. It was far from the land. I looked around and noticed I had almost nothing. I was wet and had no other clothes. I had nothing to eat or drink and nothing with which to defend myself if an animal attacked me. 8. Chapter 8 Island. All I found in my pockets was a knife and a little box with tobacco. The situation was really bad. How could I possibly survive with only these things? Before sunset, I explored the place, and I was looking for some fresh water. I found it in a small river. Then I made myself a weapon from a short stick to protect myself against dangerous animals. I decided to spend the night up in a tree. When I woke up the next morning, the sea was calm. I was surprised to discover that the waves moved the ship. The ship was now very close to the rocks where I almost died last night. The ship wasn't moving. I took off my clothes and I swam to the ship. I didn't see any way to get inside the big ship, so I swam around it twice. The second time I saw a rope which was hanging on one side. I used it to climb up, and when I was on board, I began to search for food and tools I could use. I was very lucky because some of the food on the ship was dry. I went into the kitchen and filled my pockets with biscuits. I was eating them while I was exploring the other cabins. I also found a bottle of rum which I took with me. There was no other boat on the ship, and I needed one to carry the food and tools to the beach. That's why I took some boards and I made a raft. I discovered 3 big wooden boxes, and I put them on my raft. I filled the first one with the bread, cheese, and meat I found. I found some more bottles of alcohol, which I also put on the raft. Then I heard something. Somebody was on the ship. Who was it? Somebody from my friends? It wasn't possible. My friends were all dead. I was a little scared. I went to the place where I heard the noises. Then I saw who it was. It was a dog. It was a dog of our captain. Now, I had a friend. I wasn't alone anymore. Then I noticed the tide was getting high again, and the clothes which I left on the beach were already in water. I was still on the ship, so I looked for more clothes. When I was looking for clothes, I found a box with some tools. I also found a nice carpet next to the box. Then I looked for guns, which I needed to protect myself and to hunt. I found 4 guns and 3 boxes of gunpowder. 2 of them were dry. I put all these things on my raft. The sea was calm, the tide was rising, and the wind was blowing to the land. Soon I was back on the beach. I started to look for a place where I could stay. I saw a hill. I thought that from the hill I could see where I was. I took a gun and some gunpowder, and I started walking to it. When I was on the top, I saw a sea around the whole place. I was on an island. I could see 2 small islands near. One was to the north. One was to the west. I also saw a big land to the south. It was about 100 kilometers far. I saw nothing to the east. I saw only the ocean. I couldn't see any sign of people on my island, only wild animals. 9. Chapter 9 Tent. I saw many birds on the way back from the hill. I didn't recognize them. I killed one, but its meat wasn't good. I went back to the raft. I spent the rest of the day pulling the boxes and my other discoveries further into the land. While I was working, I was thinking that I had to go back to the ship again. I had to get everything useful which was on it, because the first storm might break it into pieces. I had to make myself a place for the night. I made a kind of a tent. I brought all the things which could be destroyed by rain or sun inside the tent. The night was close. I put some clothes on the ground. I wanted to sleep on them. I also put 4 guns around me. Then I felt safe. I was tired from all the work. I fell asleep very soon. The next day, I left my clothes in the tent and I swam back to the ship. On board, I made a second raft. I found a couple of bags with nails. There were also 7 guns, bullets for them, and some more gunpowder. I took all the clothes I could find. There were also some beds, which I thought could be useful to me. I brought all this safely to the beach. From then on, I went to the ship every day. In this way, I brought many useful tools and objects. The third time, I brought as many ropes and sails as I could carry. Some days later I discovered more bread and rum, and also some sugar. All of this I brought back with me to the beach. One day, I discovered a drawer full of scissors, knives, and forks. There were also some coins from Europe and Brazil there. I knew the money was worthless on the island, but still I took it. I also found playing cards with pictures of the king and the queen. I may have some fun with the cards, I thought. It was my 12th visit to the ship. The next day, I went to the ship, but the sky was getting dark. Clouds were gathering, and the wind was getting stronger. I knew it was no use making a raft when a storm was approaching. So I swam back to the beach. That night the wind was very strong, but I was safe inside my little tent. The next morning the ship was gone. I knew I had to make myself a better place where I would be more comfortable. I knew I could stay on the island for a long time. I wanted to make a nice place for me to live. I also needed to be safe. I could look for a cave. Or I could make a bigger tent. Maybe I could do both. I needed a place which was close to fresh water, which was hidden from the heat of the sun, and was easy to protect from both people and animals. Last but not least, it had to have a view of the sea, so I could easily see a ship passing nearby. I found a nice place next to a steep hill, and I decided to put my tent there. The hill protected me from one side, and I built a fence on all other sides. There was no door, but I was using a short ladder to go over the fence, which I then took with me inside. I brought all my stuff inside and made 2 tents, a small tent and a big one. 10. Chapter 10, Calendar. The smaller tent was inside the bigger tent. The bigger tent protected the gunpowder and the food from rains. I lived in the smaller tent. When I finished the tents, I started digging at the bottom of the hill. I was bringing the stones and earth I got from there to the fence. In this way I made a terrace on the inner side of the fence. I wanted to use the cave at the bottom of the hill as a cellar. One day, I was still working on the cave when a storm appeared. There was lightning, followed by a loud thunder. It came to my mind that lightning could hit one of the boxes with gunpowder. It could destroy everything and even kill me. I was scared. As soon as the storm went away, I opened the big boxes with gunpowder. I started dividing the gunpowder into bags and smaller boxes, which I then hid in the rocks. I had a lot of powder, so this took me 3 days. I also went hunting every day. It was a break from the hard work, and it provided me with meat. I also started to know the island and its inhabitants better. I discovered some goats, and I hunted them. Then I had enough meat. Some days I was very sad. I thought about my wife. I missed her a lot. I thought about my friends in Brazil. I thought about my parents. I felt living on this island alone was meaningless. I often walked along the beach, and I regretted my choice to travel by sea. I knew traveling by sea could change your life completely. It could be great, but it could be horrible too. I knew my friends from the ship were dead. It was horrible. On the other hand, I was alive. And I was grateful for that. I was also lucky to have all the tools, food, clothes, and guns from the ship. Without them, I could hardly survive a week. I decided to make a big cross. I put it on the beach. It was near the place of my arrival to the island. I wrote on it the date of my arrival. It was the 30th of September, 1659. I wanted to keep information about time. The cross was my calendar. I made a small cut in the cross every day. The 7th cut was longer. It marked the end of the week. The beginning of each month was also a longer cut. One day, when I was thinking about my situation, I realized I had a lot of negative thoughts. It wasn't good. I decided to do something about it. I made a list of all good and bad things that happened to me. I was alone on this island, and I had little hope of ever going back to civilization. On the other hand, I was saved and I didn't die in the storm which killed my friends. I had food to eat. I didn't have a lot of clothes, but the weather was such that I hardly needed any. I had a dog. He understood some words. He understood when I said, "Sit down. Come here. Bring it. Don't do it. Don't jump. Let's eat. Let's run." This list helped me realize that all bad things come with something good in them. I tried to concentrate on positive things only. I continued to make my place better and better. I made the cave bigger. More space in the cave helped me keep all my things organized. 11. Chapter 11, Book. Then I started to make some furniture. I needed a chair and a table very much. I used the boards from my rafts and the ship to make them. Next, I made shelves inside the cave. I arranged my tools on them. My clothes and guns were hanging there as well. I was very pleased with my work. The cave was comfortable, everything was in order, and I could easily find whatever I needed. I decided to write a book. I wanted to describe my daily activities in it. It did me good to put my thoughts to paper. I started by writing down my experiences from the very first day on the island. When I got to the present, I continued describing interesting or important events in my life on the island. I decided to make a schedule to organize my time better. Every morning, I walked for a few hours. Then I worked until noon. I had lunch and I slept after lunch for 2 hours. Then I continued working until the evening. I was expanding my cave with the tools I had. I needed to make the cave big enough as it was going to be my kitchen, living room, bedroom, and cellar all at once. When I almost finished my cave, a great quantity of earth fell down from one side. I was scared because this could have killed me if I was in the cave at that time. Afterwards, I had a lot of work to clean the cave. The next week I spent putting long boards on the sides, and also on the ceiling of the cave. I wanted to avoid such disaster from happening again. Little by little I began arranging the furniture in my new home. The next 3 days, the weather was bad. It was raining day and night, but it was still warm, so I continued with my tasks inside. It was never cold on the island. It was good for me. At the end of December, I killed a goat. I also hurt another one. Its leg was broken, so I took the goat home on a string and took care of it. After 2 weeks, the goat wasn't scared. This event made me consider keeping animals, so I could provide food for myself when the gunpowder was finished. I explored the island, and I found more goats in the valleys in the center of the island. The animals were very shy, which made it difficult to approach them. I wanted to try to domesticate some goats. I only needed an opportunity to do it. I had a plan. I returned with my dog the next day. He was my hunting partner. I told my dog, "Sit down. Wait. Don't move." Then I went around the goats, but in a big distance. When the goats were between me and my dog, I hid behind a tree. Then I shouted at my dog, "Come here." He started to run to me, and the goats too. 12. Chapter 12, Corn. I stayed in my place behind the tree. When one of the goats was close to me, I jumped up and I caught its leg. I was holding the goat for 2 seconds, but then the goat kicked me with its second leg in my nose. It hurt a lot. I let the goat go, and the goat was soon gone. We weren't successful. This wasn't a good way to catch a goat. We had to do it differently. I told my dog, "Let's go home. I need some rest." I spent the period between January and March working on my fence. It took me a long time because I wanted to make it very thick and strong. Meanwhile, I found pigeons on the island. They weren't nesting in the trees, but in holes of the rocks. This made them easy to capture, and their meat was good. I could also cook and eat their eggs. This is what I was surviving on while I was working on my fence. While cleaning and arranging my home, I found a small bag. There used to be corn inside, but now there were only some leaves and dust at the bottom of it. I emptied it outside my fence because I needed the bag for gunpowder. This was just before the rains. About a month later, I was surprised to find a few green leaves growing there. It was young corn. Words couldn't express how happy I was to discover corn growing just outside my fence. It was fantastic. I could bake bread in the future. On the 16th of March, I was inside my house when I saw pieces of earth falling from the roof of my cave. I was frightened and thought all my efforts would be lost again. I ran outside the cave. Suddenly, I noticed the ground was shaking everywhere. It was an earthquake. I was paralyzed with fear. Some big stones were falling from the hill. But I was lucky. They didn't hit my tent. Although the earthquake was soon over, I was afraid to go inside the cave. I was sitting on the ground in front of my tent, still very upset and scared to enter. I started to think that it was better not to sleep in the cave. It wasn't very safe in case another earthquake came. But I didn't want to sleep in the tent. So I decided to make a house instead of the tent. I wanted to use the cave only as a cellar. The next day, I started to build the house. It was in April. It took me 3 months to build the house. But I was happy with my new home. I was ill in the last week of July. I had a temperature. I couldn't get out of the bed. I was very weak. I could do nothing in that state. I had crazy dreams. The dreams weren't very logical. But for me, they were real when I had them. 13. Chapter 13, Dream. One of my dreams was really crazy. I was in a pub which was on my island. I wanted to drink some rum, but the waitress was extremely lazy. She sat at the bar, and she did nothing. I didn't like her attitude. I was angry, but I waited. Then my wife came to the pub. She gave me a piece of paper with some text. It was a message from her father. He wrote, "Come home. You should work on the plantations." But I didn't want to go home. I went to the kitchen in the pub. There was my mother in the kitchen who was preparing some steaks, and she was also cooking soup. I tasted the soup, which was fantastic. Then 2 Englishmen came to the pub. They wanted to sell me gunpowder. One man looked like a gentleman, but the second man was horrible. I told the horrible man, "I am sorry, I don't need your gunpowder. I have a lot of gunpowder in my camp." "What did you say?" said the horrible man. "Our gunpowder isn't good for you. This is the main reason why we are here. We've traveled from London. You have to buy our gunpowder. I said, Thank you. I don't want your gunpowder. The man was really angry. Our conversation was getting worse and worse. He said some horrible things about me. I said some horrible things about him. The conversation got to a point when he wanted to kill me. When he took his gun, I started to run away. He shot at me. At that moment, I woke up. 1 week later, I felt better, but I still needed to relax. I needed to sleep a lot. In August, I was okay again. I still felt a little weak though. I knew I needed to do some physical exercise. The next 10 days, I walked around the island. This exercise made me feel better. When I felt strong again, I decided to explore the whole island. I found a new valley where I saw some tobacco plants among other unknown ones. The next day I found melons and grapes. I dried the grapes, and I had raisins. There were also apple, orange, and lemon trees on the island, which I didn't notice before. I made a pile of the fruits that I gathered, and I returned to my cave to get a bag for them. When I returned, I found the fruits destroyed. Some were eaten, some were stepped upon. I concluded from this that there are some wild animals around. Still, I liked that fruit valley, and I began thinking about moving there. Then I remembered that the beach was far away from that valley, and I wouldn't see if any ship passed by. 14. Chapter 14. House. Instead of moving to the fruit valley, I decided to build another house there, which I would visit from time to time. I made a small house, and then I surrounded it with a double fence. The house was protected like a castle. Again, I used a ladder to go in and out. But I had also stairs on the inside of the fence. I used stairs on the inside, and I used ladder on the outside. This activity took me the whole of August and the beginning of September. But I enjoyed it a lot. The fruit valley gave me so much energy. I felt so healthy and strong there. Sometimes when I was in the valley at night, I watched the moon and the stars. I thought about my wife. I thought about my family in England. I knew they could see the same moon, they could see the same stars, but we couldn't be together. I thought about my family very often. I wished the best for them. I also thought about all the people who could see the moon. I imagined the places where they lived. I felt connected with them. Sometimes I felt connected with the whole universe. I also thought about God. I had questions for God. I asked him, Why am I on this island? What is the reason for it? Why am I still alive when my friends are dead? I didn't have answers to many of these questions, but I trusted God. I believed He knew what He was doing. Then the rainy season started, which continued until the middle of October. This was my first year on the island. After the rains ended, I returned to my valley house to find the branches in the fence all green, with new leaves growing all over them. This wasn't only beautiful but also useful to me, because soon my house was covered entirely and was hardly visible. The leaves kept shadow over it, and it was very pleasant to stay in there during the dry season. I liked it so much that I decided to make a fence from the same branches around my first house as well. With the end of the rainy season, I thought it was the right time to put my seeds into the ground. I was cautious, so I only used a half of the seeds. This was a good idea because none of these seeds came up. I put the rest of the seeds in the ground just before the next rainy season, and they came up all right. Now, I had a little farm on the island. This experience made me notice that there were 2 rainy and 2 dry seasons on the island. With this in mind, I could now plan when to put seeds into the ground. 15. Chapter 15. Basket. Soon I realized I needed baskets. With baskets, I could carry more food when I made my trips around the island. I could also carry more fruit from the fruit valley. I cut branches from the same tree which I used for both my fences. After drying these branches, I used them to make baskets. When I finished that, I decided to take another, longer trip around the island. After passing the fruit valley, I found pleasant grass fields. They were very flat. They had a lot of flowers. They smelled so good. A lot of insects were flying around these flowers. I could see some big butterflies. Their wings were 10 centimeters wide. There were small trees around these fields. I found nuts on these trees. These nuts were different from nuts in England. They had a different shape. They were also sweeter than nuts in England. I also discovered that there were many parrots, rabbits, and cats at this side of the island. I even caught one parrot and took it with me. There were also many turtles and other birds there. This part of the island was more pleasant, and there was more food, but I didn't want to move. On the way back, my dog captured a young kid which I saved and took with me. I wanted to keep goats very much, and now I was offered another chance. I left the kid in the valley house until I prepared a space for it in my first home. I was so tired from the trip that on my return I relaxed the whole day. I made a cage for the parrot and brought home the kid, which started to calm down. I made a map of the whole island. I put these newly discovered places on the map. The time passed so quickly, and soon it was September again. This was my second year on the island. I was no longer as sad and desperate as I was immediately after the arrival. I accepted my destiny, and I was grateful for being well and alive. I still kept my daily schedule. I was hunting in the morning, cooking at lunchtime, relaxing in the afternoon when it was the hottest, and working in the evening. I also taught the parrot to say his name. His name was Pole. In the months of November and December, I was busy with my fields. The wild goats and rabbits were eating the little plants. I risked losing all of it, so I quickly made a fence around the place where I put the seeds in the ground. I put my dog inside the fence to guard my corn at night. Soon the plants were tall, but then another danger appeared. Birds of all kinds started eating the seeds. I shot some and kept an eye on my corn until the rest of the birds were gone. 16. Chapter 16. Bread. At the end of December, I had my first corn. It wasn't a lot. I didn't want to eat the corn, so I decided to leave it all for seeds. My goal was to put the seeds in the ground again and have more corn later. Meanwhile, I began preparing the tools I would need in a year's time. I realized I needed pots to keep the corn. I looked for clay around the island. I found some, and after 2 months of experiments, I succeeded in making 2 large pots. To protect them better, I put them in baskets and placed dry grass between the baskets and the pots. I continued making small pots and plates. I also made long but not very high pots. I put sea water in these pots. When the water was gone, I had salt. One day, quite by accident, I found a broken piece of one of my pots in the fire. The heat made it as hard as stone, and it was very red too. This gave me a good idea. I took one pot and made a fire around it. The pot was very hard after a few hours. I was happy with the result. I also felt a need for some other tools. For example, I needed a tool to make flour from seeds. I took a big piece of hardwood for that. I made a hole in the wood. Then I took another piece of hardwood, and I broke the seeds in this hole with the wood. The flour stayed on the bottom of the hole. I thought, I will need something to bake bread. I had an idea. I mixed the flour with water. Then I took 2 stones. I put them near the fire. When they were very hot, I put the bread between them. This was how I made my first bread on the island. It was during my 3rd year on the island. The bread wasn't perfect, but I liked it a lot. It was my first bread after a long time. I was thinking whether I could make a canoe out of some large tree. I found one big tree. I cut it, and I started to make a hole in it. One day, when I was working on the canoe, I realized I didn't know how to move it from the forest to the beach. I was stupid. It took me many days to make the canoe, and the thought of how I was going to put it in water never came to my mind. I tried everything to move the canoe. I even considered digging a channel from the beach to where the canoe stayed, but it was all useless. There was a hill in between, and it would have taken me a long time to dig the channel through the hill. Eventually, I gave up on the canoe. Many days of work were lost. I couldn't believe that I made such a mistake. I had to plan my work better next time. 17. Chapter 17, Canoe. During my 4th year on the island, my clothes were already very old. Instead, I began using the skins of the animals I killed. I made myself a cap and some other clothes entirely out of those skins. They kept me cool in the heat and protected me from the heavy rain. But the clothes weren't enough. I also needed an umbrella for the same purposes. It took me a while, but I succeeded in making one. I was quite happy with my life on the island. I had everything what I needed for my life on the island. I continued living like that for the next 5 years. I kept on growing my corn. I continued drying grapes to make raisins. All my activities remained the same. During this time, I decided to make a new canoe. It was smaller and easier to move. I wanted to travel around the island in it. When the canoe was finished, I put food, water, and tools in it. I was ready for the trip. I wanted to test if I could go around the island in my canoe. It was the 6th of June on the 6th year of my stay on the island that I started this trip. I faced danger as soon as I started my journey. I had to go around some rocks in the sea. When I wanted to go back to the coast, I realized there was a strong current. The current was taking me away from the island. The situation was horrible. I was scared. I thought, I will die in the open sea. I didn't have enough food and water for a long journey. I fought very hard against the current for 2 hours. Finally, I managed to get close to my island. I could continue my trip around the island. Now I knew I was stronger than the currents around the island. It made me feel good. Soon, I found a small river which went further inside the island. But I got nowhere because soon the river was very narrow. Stones blocked the way. I couldn't continue. I got off my canoe. I went to explore this part of the island. It wasn't far from the part of the island which I knew. I even found the way to my house in the valley. I was so tired from the trip that I fell asleep. I was woken up by a voice. The voice was saying my name. Robinson, where are you? Robinson, where are you? I was scared at first, but then I saw my parrot pole on top of the hedge. He learnt the phrases I repeated to myself so many times. Now he was saying them with the same intonation I used. I was surprised to find the parrot here, because I left it in my house. Still, I was happy to hear someone talk to me. I left the canoe there and returned home with the parrot. I didn't take such long trips for a year, and I was staying in my house most of the time. I kept on making wooden tools and clay pots. I even found a way to make pots with a wheel, which made my work much lighter. I also figured out how to make a tobacco pipe, which I missed a lot ever since I came to this island. 18. Chapter 18, Foot. One day, I also noticed I was running out of the gunpowder. I was worried I wouldn't be able to kill any more goats once it was gone. The kid I once caught was old. It was too late to try to find a male for her. I wanted meat, but I didn't have the heart to kill her. One day, she died a natural death. It was 11 years since I first came to this island, and all this time, I was using gunpowder to provide myself with meat. Now I thought of finding some other way to supply myself with food. I decided to make some trap. I didn't succeed at first, but eventually I caught 3 young goats. They were 1 male and 2 females. I took them home with me. I had to make a fence for them because I feared they might run away with the wild ones once they were adult. It took me 3 months, but I made a nice fence around a suitable space where there was a lot of grass and water for them. After some time, the young goats became very calm, and they were eating out of my hand. In 2 years, I had 12 goats, and in 3 years' time, I had more than 20 goats. This way I had a lot of milk and meat. I experimented several times, and at last I managed to make cheese and butter. My table was full now, and I was surrounded by animals. I had my old dog, cats, goats, and Pole, my parrot. The only thing I still missed was someone to talk to. One day, I set out to reach that part of the island where the strong current was. On the way there, I thought to myself how ridiculous I would have appeared if some Englishmen saw me. I had a big hat, a short jacket, and short trousers all made out of goatskin. I didn't have socks or shoes, but I put some goatskin around my feet. I had 2 belts, one for the gun and knife, and one for the gunpowder. On my back I had a basket. I also carried a gun on my shoulder, and an umbrella made out of goatskin above my head. My beard was pretty long. I realized I was looking very unusual from what I used to look years ago. One day, about lunchtime, I was walking on the beach going to check on my canoe when I came across something surprising. I saw the mark of a human footprint on the sand. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. I was scared. I hurried back to my home. I was so scared I couldn't sleep that night. Why was there no canoe? Why were there no more footprints? I thought that maybe it was the footprint of one of the people who probably inhabited the islands around. I began to worry whether they saw my canoe and were now preparing to attack me. Then I convinced myself that maybe I saw the mark of my own foot and I was a fool to get scared by it. This realization made me feel better. I took my courage and I went to see the footprint again. 19. Chapter 19. Cannibals. When I approached the footprint, I saw that the footprint was much bigger than the size of my foot. It was impossible that the footprint was mine. I got scared again. That night, I considered letting all my animals into the wild, destroying my fields and my summer house, so that no mark of human habitation was left on the island. I was so afraid I couldn't fall asleep the whole night. In the morning, I finally fell asleep for a short time. When I woke up, my head was clear. Now it didn't seem that strange that people lived on the islands around. Maybe they came to my island time to time, or now the wind carried them this way for the first time. I remembered that for the 15 years I lived on the island, I didn't meet any human being or discovered any signs of a settlement here. This calmed me down. Still, I wanted to be safe. I made another wall around my house, and left holes through which I could easily fire several guns if attacked. Now I had such a strongly protected house surrounded with walls and thick trees that no one could come near me. I was also worried about my goats. I divided the animals and built a smaller fence in another part of the island. It took me lots of time and effort, but in the end my animals were safe from any unexpected attack. It was the 16th year of my life on the island when something very sad happened. My dog died. I was crying for 3 days. It was my worst day on the island. I went to my goats, and I told them how sad I was. They didn't understand my words, but I felt they understood me. They felt my emotions. They were unusually calm and quiet. It was now 2 years after the footprint on the beach. One day, as I was walking towards the beach, I thought I saw a canoe in the distance. I couldn't be sure, so I just continued my walk. It was then that I came across something terrifying. The whole beach was covered with human remains. Skulls, hands, and feet were all over the place, and there was a black circle after a fire. I was angry and scared at the same time. They were here again, I thought. I was sick and threw up at the horrible sight. I went back to my house, and again I considered what to do. I decided to give up going out at sea with my canoe because the cannibals could capture me. I also stopped firing guns because I feared being discovered by the sound. Every time I went out of my house, I carried guns to protect myself in the case of a sudden attack. Soon I started thinking how I could kill some of the cannibals and save their victims if I could. If that wasn't possible, at least I could frighten them so they would never come here again. I began looking at that side of the island where I first saw the human footprint. I wanted to find a hiding place for myself and prepare it for the attack. Then I changed my mind and thought it was unreasonable to fight them because they didn't do any harm to me. 20. Chapter 20. Cave. Eventually, I gave up the preparations altogether and decided to act only if they attacked me first. For a whole year I was hiding my activities as well as I could. I hid my canoe. I kept myself occupied with my animals and fields, but I was very careful. I was afraid to make loud noises, and I was worried every time I made a fire. But I needed fire because I needed to cook. So when I made a fire, I tried to make as little smoke as possible. Smoke could go very high, and it could be seen from a distance. Once when I was cutting some branches in the forest, I discovered a small cave. I went inside it, but as soon as my eyes were okay with the dark, I noticed 2 bright eyes looking at me. I jumped outside. I was scared to death. I waited, but nothing happened. I went slowly to the beginning of the cave, and I listened. I heard something. It sounded as if there was somebody injured inside. I took my gun, and I entered the cave slowly. When my eyes could see again, I discovered an old goat. It was dying in the cave. I returned to the cave the next day to find out that the goat was dead. I explored the place and found it very safe. It would make a great hiding place near the beach. That's why I brought some of my guns and some gunpowder there. 23 years passed since I first stepped on this island. Now I was living comfortably and had many animals to keep me company. Pole was repeating my name very pleasantly. I had 2 more parrots, and I taught all of them to pronounce my name. It was the last month of my 23rd year on the island when, as I was walking to my fields early one morning, I saw fire on the beach. I immediately returned to my house and loaded all guns. I took my telescope and went close to the beach. I hid myself and observed them. I saw 9 naked people who came in 2 canoes. It seemed that they were waiting for the high tide to leave the island. As soon as they left, I went to the beach. It was full of blood and bones again. This made me sick and angry, and I decided to kill as many of them as I could the next time I saw them. They didn't return for a long time. Meanwhile, something else happened that disturbed my routine. One evening, I was disturbed out of my ordinary activities by the sound of a gun at sea. I got out of my house, and I saw a flash coming from the sea. A second shot followed. I thought it was coming from some ship in danger asking for help. I took all the dry wood I could find around and ran to the beach where I made a big fire. They probably saw the fire because they fired again. I thought, I will speak to somebody tonight. This is great. I kept the fire until midnight, but there was no sign of them. It was strange. It was something what my brain couldn't understand. Maybe in the morning I will know more, I thought. 21. Chapter 21, Visitors. The next day in the morning I saw the ship. The ship stopped far from the beach. The ship looked empty. I didn't understand it. I expected the people who fired the gun yesterday. I really wanted to communicate to somebody. I miss communication with real people very much. I took my canoe, and I decided to go to the ship to see if there was anybody still alive on board. The ship looked Spanish, and it was completely destroyed. When I got closer, I saw a dog. He was very happy to see me. I gave him bread, and I gave him water. He was hungry and extremely thirsty. I found nobody on the ship. What happened to the men from the ship? I thought. It was very strange. I didn't have an answer to this question. It was a mystery. There were many boxes with different things on the ship. Some boxes were small. Some boxes were big. Many of the big boxes had bottles with alcohol in them. But these boxes were too heavy. I couldn't take them on the canoe. I found guns and gunpowder. I took them to the canoe. I also found some other useful things. I returned to the island in the evening with several small boxes on my canoe. I had some new shirts and also gold, silver, and a lot of gunpowder. Gunpowder was important to me. On the island, it was more valuable than any money or precious metals. There was something else which I needed very much, and that was shoes. I found 2 pairs of shoes on board the ship. I took them with me. I put all my new things in the cave. I made 5 trips to the ship. I took everything useful for me. Then I hid the canoe again and went back to my house. Everything went back to normal. Time went quickly. I often thought about the men from the ship and the cannibals on the beach. These thoughts were always in the back of my mind, day and night. It was one night in March when I dreamed that 2 canoes with cannibals landed on the beach. One of their victims ran away and came to my house where I saved him. Then we became friends. He helped me navigate out of the dangerous currents around the island. I woke up, but the dream stayed in my mind. I realized that if I had somebody to help me, I might be able to escape from the island and reach the continent. Maybe I could save one of the victims brought to this island. I decided to look out for the cannibals, and for the next year and a half I went daily around the beach, hoping to see canoes. This finally happened one morning. I saw 5 canoes with more than 30 men on the beach. I couldn't attack them because they were too many. So I just waited. I was observing them through my telescope. They made a fire, and they were dancing around it. I also saw 2 men, the victims, tied together. The 2 tied men were taken to the fire after a while. One was beaten and killed. The cannibals painted their bodies with his blood. It was like a theater. But this wasn't a theater. It was real. It was horrible. But I couldn't do anything. There were too many cannibals. The second man waited on the side. When the cannibals didn't look, the second man jumped up and he started to run away. He was running in my direction. I ran to the beach and I hid behind a tree. I saw that he was followed only by 2 cannibals. This was the right moment to save the prisoner. The man ran as fast as possible, but the cannibals were closer and closer to him. Their speed was faster than his. 22. Chapter 22, Friday. I prepared 2 guns, and I waited behind the tree. The prisoner ran directly to my tree. But he still didn't see me. I didn't move. Then he ran around me. I was still hidden behind the tree. When the first cannibal ran close to me, I jumped from behind the tree. He was shocked. I shot him. The second cannibal saw this. He tried to shoot an arrow at me. I had to shoot him too. The prisoner stopped when he heard the shots and he turned. He was scared. I smiled at him. I showed him that it was okay to come closer. He came to me. He went down to his knees. He put his head on the ground. Then he took my foot. He put my foot on his head. I showed him to stand up. He stood up and looked at the dead cannibals. He went to their bodies. He looked at the holes in their bodies. He probably couldn't understand what happened to the cannibals. It was unbelievable to him. He took the arrows from the dead men. We took the bodies of the cannibals. We hid the bodies in the forest near. Then we went into the deeper forest. I took the man to my cave. The cave was my secret. Nobody could find us there. I gave him bread, meat, and some water. He was so tired that he fell asleep almost immediately. I had an opportunity to look at him. I could see he was young, slim, but very strong. I thought he was about 25 years old. He had long black hair, dark skin, and a pleasant face. I let him sleep, and I went outside. I stayed near the cave, and I watched for the cannibals. But they didn't look for us. 3 hours later, the man came out of the cave. He showed me how happy he was that he was alive and safe. I started speaking to him. I named him Friday because it was Friday when I saved his life. I told him my name and I taught him yes and no. We stayed in the cave that night. The next day, we went on top of the hill. I saw through my telescope that the canoes were gone. We were alone on the island. We went carefully to the beach. First, we went to the place where we hid the bodies of the dead cannibals. When we found them, Friday wanted to eat them. I was angry. I showed to Friday that it wasn't good to eat them. Here I understood that Friday was also a cannibal. We buried the cannibals. Then we walked to the beach. What we saw was horrible. There were human bones all around. The sand was red with blood. I asked Friday to collect all the body parts. I prepared a big fire. I decided to burn the body parts in the fire. We went to my house. I made a little tent for Friday between the two fences which were around my house. I took all his weapons away. I wanted to feel safe. After a while, I realized this wasn't necessary at all, because Friday was a very faithful and honest man. He was like a child to me, and I was like a father to him. On many occasions later, he showed me he would sacrifice his life to save mine. I was very happy to have Friday around, and I began teaching him everything he needed to know about life like a European. First, I taught him some new words. I started with hi, hello, bye, thank you. It wasn't easy at the beginning, but I was patient because I was happy I could speak to somebody. 23. Chapter 23, Conversation. 2 days later, I shot a young goat. Friday was scared of the gun. He didn't understand how such a small thing could kill a goat. He didn't want to touch the gun. Later I saw how he talked to the gun. He probably asked the gun not to kill him. We took the goat. We made a nice soup. Before the soup was finished, Friday went to the forest, and he brought some herbs. He put them into the soup. The herbs were similar to pepper. The soup smelled fantastic, and it tasted fantastic too. We cooked some of the goat meat the next day with sauce. Again, Friday brought some herbs and also plants. The herbs made the sauce taste great. They made a big difference. And we made a nice salad from the plants. I taught Friday how to prepare corn and bake bread out of it, and in a few days he could do it as well as me. Then we started expanding my garden, and he helped me plant more corn. In all activities, Friday was of great help. He was also very good at catching fish. Our cooperation was simply great. We were a good team. I wanted to teach Friday to speak English very well. I wanted to teach him English as fast as possible. I wanted to be a good teacher. I took my role very seriously. I thought about the best method to teach him English. When I spoke to him fast, and when I used all the words and grammar, he didn't understand me. So I tried to speak mainly in the present, and I used simple words. I also said only short sentences. This way, Friday understood more. We spoke about many topics. When Friday didn't understand something, I pointed at it, or I tried to explain the word to him. If it didn't help, I made a picture of the thing in the sand. Soon Friday started to understand many of my sentences in the present. He also started to use some words. His pronunciation was very bad at the beginning, but it wasn't important for me. I understood him, and I was very happy somebody spoke to me. Friday was a good student. He was clever, and he improved quickly. Soon he could say some words like an Englishman. Of course, not all the words, but the words which he said correctly made me very happy. I could see that Friday very often repeated aloud what I said. I thought that it also helped him to learn so fast. I thought, learning a language is quite easy. You only need to copy what you hear, and if you don't understand something, you need a picture of it. Then you need a lot of practice. This is the best system. Friday's progress was fast. He was able to talk more and more every day. In a couple of months, we could have a basic, simple conversation. Friday liked my tools. They were very interesting for him. He especially liked the telescope. He borrowed the telescope very often. He went to one of the hills, and he watched everything around. Once, I asked him about his people and how he became a prisoner. He told me that they ate human meat like their opponents. In fact, in the past, he did a ritual on the other side of my island. He was probably one of the cannibals, who I saw a long time ago. He told me about the sea and the currents in the sea. Thanks to Friday, I learned about the history, culture, and traditions of his people. I also told him my personal story, and I described England and Europe to him. 24. Chapter 24. Knife. I told Friday about our cities, schools, ships, and traveling around the world. I told him that education is important in Europe, and that we study from books. It was all new to him. Friday's people didn't need schools on the islands. They had all what they needed for their life. When I felt I could trust him enough, I showed him how gunpowder worked. I taught him how to use a gun. I gave him a knife and a belt. He was happy with my presents. He said that he saw a similar knife before. I asked to tell me more. He explained that his people saved white men from a small boat and that they still lived with them. He counted 17 Europeans who lived with his people. I thought these might be the sailors from the ship which came to my island some time ago. They probably saved themselves in a boat because I didn't find anybody when I went on board to look for survivors. I asked Friday to tell me more about them. He told me that they were okay. I was happy to hear that some Europeans lived not very far from my island. I started to plan how to meet them. The next day, we went on a small trip around the island. First, we went to the cross where I wanted to mark another day. "What is it?" asked Friday when we came to the cross. I explained that we have 7 days in a week. When Friday heard the word Friday, he laughed. I explained to him that I saved him on Friday. That's why I called him Friday. Now, he fully understood the meaning of his name. During the walk, Friday told me, "If we build a canoe and go to my island, I will tell my people how you saved my life." I took Friday to the other side of the island. I showed him my canoe there. But he said, "This canoe is too small for 2 people. We should make a bigger canoe." Soon we started building the canoe we needed. We chose and cut a big tree, and I showed him how to cut the inside to form a canoe. It took us a month to do this, and 2 days more to drag it to the beach. The canoe was ready, and we were ready too. The day before we wanted to go, Friday went to the beach. He came back very quickly. He looked very scared. Before I asked him what happened, he said that there were 3 canoes on the beach. He was scared because he thought the cannibals returned to look for him. He said, "There is a war between 2 groups of local people. We are neighbors, but we don't like each other. We had many conflicts in the past. There was never peace. We kill each other whenever we can. When they see me, they will kill me." I told him, "Don't worry. We are strong. And maybe they didn't come for you today. We will see." We took 15 guns. We went on top of a hill. We saw 14 cannibals, 2 prisoners, and 3 canoes on the beach. They stopped close to the place where the forest was near the beach. This made it easier to attack them and save the prisoners. We approached them quietly through the forest. While we were walking, I was considering my right to kill them. Maybe I had no reason to shoot so many people who didn't do any bad to me. After some thinking, I decided only to watch and attack them only if it was necessary. 25. Chapter 25. Father. When we were very close to the beach, we saw that the cannibals were around the fire. They started to eat the first of their prisoners. The second prisoner was still alive. He wasn't one of Friday's people. He was European. The cannibals wanted to eat him too. I decided to save him if it was possible. We moved closer to the place where the cannibals were gathered. The cannibals were still round the fire, but 2 went for the white man. When I saw this, I loaded the guns and asked Friday to do exactly what I did. We fired quickly at the cannibals from 6 guns. We killed 3 and injured 2 of the cannibals. The rest jumped up to their feet, but didn't know which way to run because they didn't know from which direction the danger was coming. Some of them ran to their canoes. Some of them stayed on the beach. We continued shooting, and we shot 3 other cannibals. After that, we took our guns and we ran to the beach. We shouted very loud. I ran to the prisoner and Friday shot the nearest cannibal. I freed the European. He said something in Spanish to me. I gave him a gun. He was weak, but he could shoot from a gun if some cannibal attacked him. The cannibals were shocked by our sudden attack. Our unusual gun scared them a lot. Only 2 cannibals tried to fight us. We shot them with our guns. Friday fought very well. He quickly killed 1 cannibal who was injured. The second injured cannibal ran into the forest. Friday ran after him, and he killed him with his knife. Only 3 cannibals were able to run away. They jumped into their canoe, and they started to leave. Friday shot at them, but he didn't hit them. It was dangerous to let them go because they could tell their people about us. Friday and I wanted to jump in one of their canoes to chase them, but to our surprise, we found another tied person on the bottom. He was scared because he didn't see the fight, but only heard it. The ropes were so tight around his neck that he was going to die soon if I didn't cut them. When Friday saw him, he started to cry. Then he laughed and he hugged the man. Then he jumped and began dancing around him. Then he cried and laughed at the same time. When the strongest emotions were gone, Friday told me that the prisoner was his father. I felt tears in my eyes when I saw the son's love for his father. This happy incident delayed us, and the cannibals were already gone. Friday returned to the canoe and held his father's head to his chest. Then he rubbed his father's hands and feet with his hands to warm him up. Soon Friday's father was feeling much better. When they talked, Friday suddenly jumped up and ran to the forest as fast as he could. When he came back, he had a bottle full of fresh water. He handed the bottle to his father, who was dying with thirst. After he drank and was feeling better, I asked Friday to give the rest of the water to the Spanish, who needed water very much too. The Spanish was very grateful to me, but he was so weak. He couldn't get up on his feet. I asked Friday to rub his hands and feet just as he did to his father. It helped him a lot. Then I asked the Spanish to go to the canoe with Friday's help because I wanted to take them to our place. Friday, however, being young and strong, just took the Spanish on his back and carried him to the canoe. Then he carefully put him there and arranged so that both he and his father were comfortable. 26. Chapter 26, Dinner. When the Spanish was inside the canoe, Friday jumped out of the canoe and guided it along the beach faster than I could walk. We soon reached the place where I saved Friday. Friday helped our new guests out of the canoe, but they weren't able to walk. We had to carry them to our home. We had another problem when we reached the house. Friday's father and the Spanish couldn't go over the fence or climb a ladder, and I didn't want to destroy the fence. I wanted to pull them over the fence. But then I realized the cannibals were already gone. We could stay outside the fence. We made a comfortable tent for them outside the fence and prepared soft beds for them too. As soon as we finished this, I started cooking dinner. Friday brought some fish, and we cooked them quickly. We all had dinner together in the tent. Friday was my interpreter because the Spanish spoke the language of Friday's people. After that, I asked Friday to go back to the beach and bring us the weapons we left in our hurry. I also asked him to bury the bodies of the killed cannibals the next day. He did as I said, so later when I went to the beach I could hardly recognize the place if it wasn't for the big tree behind which we were hidden. The next morning, I asked Friday's father what he thought of the cannibals returning to kill us. He said our guns created a great shock. They didn't know how we won the battle using them. He said he heard them shout in their language that Friday and I were spirits sent from heaven to punish them with fire. I was still worried the cannibals might return with a bigger army, but nothing of the kind happened. When our guests were strong enough, I began to think about the journey by sea again. I asked the Spanish about his arrival on these islands, and he said that he was on a Spanish ship going to Havana. There were 16 Europeans, Spanish and Portuguese, on Friday's home island. He told me that the storm broke the ship near my island. They saved themselves in a boat. Now they live with Friday's people. I asked the Spanish whether they tried to make another sea journey. Of course they wanted to go home, but he said that they had no tools with which to build another ship. I showed the Spanish the tools which I had from the ship. He said that with my tools, it was possible to build a ship. I thought the Spanish and Friday's father could return to their island. They could tell other Europeans about the possibility to build a ship. Together we could go to Brazil or Havana or maybe Europe. However, the Spanish suggested something else. He told me that it would be better to wait for at least half a year, because there wasn't enough food for 16 more men on my island. We wouldn't have enough food to eat while building the ship, and much less to take with us for the long journey. The Spanish advised me to plant more corn, and he and Friday's father helped us expand the fences and fields. We caught more goats. We increased the number of goats to 50 animals. We collected a lot of fruit. Then we dried the fruit. We started preparing the materials for the ship. We chose a few trees, and I showed them how to cut them to form long boards. In half a year, we had a lot of food. We had so much corn that we needed more baskets and pots to store it all. We saw that the Spanish was very good at making baskets. He had a great talent. His baskets were excellent. He also used a special technique to make baskets. The technique was fast and effective. He made the baskets 3 times faster than me. I asked him to teach me his skill. I wasn't as fast as him, but I was faster than before. 27. Chapter 27, Englishmen. We put all the food in my cave. It was safe there. Then the Spanish and Friday's father could go back. They could bring the other men here. We gave them food and 4 guns in case they were attacked again. Then they took the canoe and they went away. 2 days passed since they left when something unexpected happened. I was woken up by Friday at about 6 o'clock in the morning. "Are they here?" I asked Friday. He said, "Not yet. But somebody else is here. I saw a boat." I went to the top of the nearest hill. I saw the boat. It was clear that these people weren't the friends who we expected. The boat came from a completely different direction. I could also see a ship. I knew the shape. The ship was English. I was confused. On one hand, I was happy to see Englishmen after 27 years on the island. On the other hand, I was concerned because the island was quite out of the way of any English ship. Recently, there were no storms which could have taken them here. Perhaps they were pirates or murderers and were hiding here. All this made me very cautious. Friday and I remained hiding, observing them for a while. The boat approached the beach, and I counted 11 men. They were all Englishmen. 3 of the men had hands tied together. The 8 other men took them to the beach. 2 prisoners were calm, but the 3rd prisoner tried to say something. He looked very scared. He asked the men in the boat for something. On seeing this, Friday turned to me and told me that it seemed Englishmen were also eating people. I told him that they didn't have the slightest intention of eating them. Instead, I thought they were going to shoot them. After a while, I noticed this wasn't the case. The people from the boat went exploring the island, while the 3 tied prisoners were sitting at the beach with 2 men as guards. They looked desperate. The situation made me think of my own arrival on the island. Just like those prisoners, I felt lost at first. Soon the tide was low, and the boat they came with was stuck in the sand. They couldn't move it, so I heard them shout to each other that they would leave with the next tide. This gave me 10 hours. The night was approaching, so we would get an opportunity to go near them and overhear their conversations. Now I was sure they came here to leave those 3 men here as a punishment. Friday and I stayed hidden until dark. I noticed the men who stood guard were asleep, and the 3 prisoners were sitting under a tree quite close to us. It seemed to me they were also out of sight from the other sailors, so I could approach them without being seen. I went to them with Friday following closely behind me. When we were very close to them, I spoke quietly to them. We were still hidden behind the trees, and they couldn't see us. When they heard my voice, they couldn't believe somebody spoke English to them from the dark forest. "What was that?" asked one of the men. "I heard something." "I heard a tree speak," answered the other. "But it is impossible. A tree can't speak English." "Yes, you heard something, but it isn't a tree," I said quietly. "My name is Robinson Crusoe. I am an Englishman. I live on this island. I will help you if you tell me who you are." After the initial shock was over, one of them answered my questions. He was the captain of the ship, but some of the sailors started a mutiny. He, his assistant, and a passenger were taken prisoners. The other sailors were going to leave them on this island to starve to death. The captain told me that there were only 2 dangerous sailors who took control over the others in this group. If the leaders were captured, the rest would return under the command of the captain. 28. Chapter 28. Control. I said, "I am willing to help you, but I have one condition. I want full control over the ship if we manage to get it back." The captain and the other 2 prisoners agreed, and they gave me full control over the ship and over their lives. We freed the prisoners. Then we went back to the forest. I gave them guns, and we started to plan the attack. In the middle of our conversation, we noticed that the sailors who stood guard were woken up. They stood up. They shouted to 3 other men who were near to them. At that moment, we shot the guards. Then the captain spoke to the 3 other men. He told them to be loyal to him and help him get back to the ship. They agreed, and we tied them and left them on the beach. The other 3 men who heard the shots came back. They could see the situation changed. We were 5. We had a lot of guns. The situation was bad for them. They also agreed to be loyal to the captain. We tied these men too. We hid our 6 prisoners in the forest. Then I and the captain had finally time to talk to each other. I told him my story, and he was shocked. He also thanked me a lot for my help. He and his 2 friends were hungry, so we went to my house, where I showed them what I built for myself during my stay on the island. They were amazed by all the things which I had. However, we didn't have much time to explore my inventions because we had to plan how to get the ship back. There were 16 people on board, and we were only 5. First, we decided to take everything out of the boat. We thought the sailors could send another boat to the island if the men from the first boat didn't come back with the next high tide. In the morning, we heard the ship fire a gun as a signal for the boat to return. After a while, the ship fired a few times again. There was no response. Then we noticed that the sailors took another boat and went to the beach. Through my telescope, I could see 8 men rowing, and they were all armed. We could observe the boat approach us, and the captain recognized the sailors. He knew that 6 of them were still faithful to him, but there was also the man who started the mutiny. The captain feared that the leader of the mutiny and the other men in the boat would be difficult to defeat, but I told him that we had a good chance of winning. But we had to act quickly. The captain trusted 2 of our prisoners. They promised to fight on our side, so we gave them weapons. Prepared this way, with 7 men ready to fight on our side, we expected the arrival of the boat. As soon as it reached the beach, the men jumped out of it and pulled it up the beach. Then they ran to the other boat and were surprised to see it empty. They tried to call their friends. They shouted their names, then shot in the air, but it was all useless because nobody shouted back. This surprised the newly arrived sailors even more, and they began putting the boat in water again. It seemed they wanted to go back to the ship to inform the others that some accident happened with the sailors in the first boat. Observing all this, the captain got scared they would go back to the ship and leave the island altogether. Luckily, during a few seconds the sailors dropped this idea. Now they left 3 men in the boat, and the others went to the forest to look for their friends. 29. Chapter 29, Plan. We continued observing all actions of the 2 groups. The 5 men in the forest sat down under a tree. After a long consultation under the tree, they got up and walked towards the beach. They probably gave up looking for their friend, and we had to act quickly before they reached their boat. I had a plan. I told the assistant to go with Friday more to the center of the island and shout at the sailors. When the sailors heard this, they shouted back. Then, they started going in the direction of the voice. Friday and the assistant continued shouting back. They started to take the sailors to the opposite side of the island. This strategy worked as I planned. The 5 men were soon very far from the beach. This was very good for us. We went to the 3 men in the boat. We explained the situation to them. They decided not to fight us. They became our prisoners too. Meanwhile, Friday and the captain's assistant returned. They led the others so far away that they wouldn't return sooner than in 2 hours. We hid and waited for them. When they returned, they were very tired. When the sailors came to the boat, they were amazed to find it empty. They started calling their friend, but again, there was no response. After a while, the leader of the mutiny and 2 others separated from the rest and walked towards the forest where we were hiding. The captain and Friday attacked them as soon as they were closer to us and away from the group. The leader was killed on the spot. A second man was injured and the third one ran back. Then we all emerged from the forest, and we ran to the boat. The captain spoke to sailors. He asked them to give up. When the sailors understood the situation, they dropped their weapons quickly. We decided to tie the prisoners. But we didn't tie all of them. The captain trusted 3 of the men. We didn't tie these 3 men. Now we were 10 men. We started to plan how to get the ship. After some discussion, we knew what to do. Friday and I stayed on the island. We had to watch the prisoners. The captain, his assistant, and the passenger took the clothes of some of the prisoners. They wanted to look like them. Then the captain and his sailors took the boat. They went to the ship. When they were near the ship, they spoke to the men on the ship. They told them it wasn't possible to find the other men. When all of the men from the boat were on the ship, the captain showed himself, and the attack began. Several sailors were injured in the battle. There was only 1 person shot, and he was the second leader of the mutiny. As soon as the captain regained possession of the ship, he ordered 7 guns to be fired, which was the signal we agreed on. I was happy to hear those shots. Soon the captain went back to the island. We hugged each other. He told me that the ship was now under my control. I was so happy. I started crying so much that I wasn't able to speak. After I calmed down a little, the captain ordered his men to bring a lot of food from the ship to the island. We were going to have a nice meal to celebrate our victory and my departure from the island. There was expensive wine, excellent tobacco, pork, beef, and peas. There were biscuits for dessert. I was very happy to taste all those things again. The captain gave me clean clothes. I didn't wear clothes for a long time. The clothes were very light. They were a little uncomfortable first, but it was soon fine. When the meal was over and I had clean clothes again, the captain and I had to discuss what to do with the 5 prisoners who the captain didn't trust. The men were really horrible. He even feared taking them on board the ship in chains. I suggested discussing the matter with them and seeing if, perhaps, they would choose to stay on the island instead of going back to England, where they faced death for mutiny. We met the prisoners and explained the new situation to them. They had to choose between a death sentence in England and a life on the island, and they went for the second option. We put them in the cave. The cave was now the prison. I told them to wait for more orders. 30. Chapter 30. Son, I needed some time to prepare for the journey. I had to think about what to take with me. In fact, I didn't need to take many things. I decided to take my dog, my parrot, my book, and some other small things. I also took the money, gold and silver which I found in the ships. They were finally useful to me. I met with the prisoners one more time. I showed them my corn and my domestic animals, and told them what I discovered and what I built on the island. Then I went on board the ship. We left the island on the 19th of December, 1686. It was 27 years, 2 months, and 19 days since I first stood on the island. First, we went to the island where Friday's people lived. The Spanish and Portuguese sailors were very happy when they saw us. They were happy that we had a ship. Now we didn't have to build a new ship. We could go to Europe. My dog was very happy too. When he saw one of the Spanish sailors, he ran to him very quickly. He jumped on him. He was extremely happy. The Spanish sailor was his owner. He was very happy too. He started crying when he saw his dog. It was a very emotional meeting. The sailors started to prepare for our journey across the ocean. Friday had to make a decision. He could stay with his people, or he could go to Europe with me. He needed some time to think about it. We stayed on the island one night. In the morning, I asked Friday if he made a decision. He told me that he wanted to go with me to Europe. He prepared everything for the journey. We were ready to go. We started our journey. 2 months later, After a safe journey across the ocean, I stepped on English soil again. 35 years passed since I left my homeland. It seemed to me the whole world changed in that time. London was a different city. There were some new houses, streets, roads, shops, parks, and big bridge across the river. But it wasn't all. People also changed. They had different clothes. Women had different hairstyle. Men had different hats and new types of guns. People used new tools which I didn't see before. They had new names for these tools. It was all very interesting. The style of music in the pubs was also different. I heard new songs. I liked this new style. I wanted to sing these new songs. From London, I returned to my town, York. My parents were both dead. I found some relatives. My sister, my uncle, and my aunt were still alive. They were happy to see me. But they thought I was long dead. So I had no rights to family's money or land. But I could stay and live in their house. England was a big shock to Friday. Everything was so new for him. He saw so many things for the first time in his life. It was all very interesting for him. He liked this new experience. What he didn't like was the cold weather in winter. It was February. Snow, ice, freezing weren't good for him. It wasn't logical to him why we lived in such conditions. I told him that in summer, the weather is much better. I sent a letter to Brazil. I still knew the address very well. I wanted to contact people in Brazil. I wanted to know if my wife was still alive. I wanted to know if my plantation still existed. But I didn't know what to expect. The connection was broken many years ago. In May, I got a letter and some packets from my wife. She wrote she waited 10 years for me. Then she stopped believing I was alive. She married again, and she had a family. But her new husband died 2 years ago. I also got a letter from my wife's father. He took care of my plantation. In his letter, he wrote detailed calculations of the expenses and profit from the plantation during all these years. They both sent me many nice presents. They sent some nice skins and a little box full of gold. They also sent me some boxes of sugar to sell. My wife had also a big surprise for me. She wrote that I had a son. It was great news. He was born 8 months after I left Brazil. He was now a big man, and he wanted to meet me. So many things happened to me in such a short time. It was shocking. I wanted to cry. Then I wanted to laugh. All the emotions were too much for me. I wasn't able to calm down. I stood up. I sat down. I stood up again. I walked around the room. I laughed. Then I cried again. When I calmed down a little, I started to think about what to do. 31. Chapter 31, Brazil. I thought about moving back to Brazil. I wanted to see my son, my wife, and my plantation. After some longer thinking, I decided to go to Brazil, but only for a visit. I wanted to see if I could live there again. I wrote to my wife. I asked her if it was okay to visit them for some days. With the letter, I sent nice presents to her and her father's family. After some time, I got a letter from my wife. She wrote that I was welcome to visit them. Her invitation made me happy. I started to plan another journey by sea. I bought nice presents for them. 2 weeks later, I was ready to go. When we arrived to Brazil, I met with my wife and my son. She changed a lot, but she was still very beautiful. My son was a big man now. He was very intelligent. He had his own family too. He had also big responsibility. He managed plantations of all the family, and he was responsible for a big land. My son spoke only Portuguese and a little Spanish. My Portuguese wasn't very good after so many years. I forgot many words. I remembered only some basic phrases. But with practice, I started to remember the words fast. After 2 weeks, I could have a basic conversation on many topics. And 1 month later, I was able to speak fluently and automatically. I was very happy that I could speak with my wife and my son. We had so many things for a conversation. Soon after arriving to Brazil, we had a big party. It was a celebration of my son's birthday and also my arrival to Brazil. Brazil also changed a lot. Many things were different from what was in my memory. Plantations were much bigger. Many people worked on them. I was with my family for 3 months. I knew I wasn't very far from my island. I started thinking about visiting the island again. I wanted to see the island for some days. Friday also wanted to see the island again. My son also wanted to go. I thought it wasn't a good idea. I knew how dangerous the sea could be. But he wanted to see the place that he knew only from my stories. We planned our journey. 2 weeks later we left Brazil. We went on a ship which went to Havana. We had an agreement with the captain to stop at my island on the way there. When I arrived at my island, we met with Friday's people. They now lived on the island. I asked them, "What happened to the prisoners? Did you eat them?" They told me they didn't eat Europeans. They ate only their enemies from other islands. They told me that when they came to the island, the prisoners were dead. They probably killed each other. I wanted to stay on the island and my son too. I asked the captain if he could pick us up on the way back. He agreed. I saw many children who ran around. It was interesting to see many people on the island where I lived alone for so many years. I saw that the people on the island were very happy. Friday was happy there too. He met a woman who he liked very much. Friday asked me what I thought about his staying on the island. He knew that I saved his life in the past. He didn't want to leave me without asking me. I agreed. I saved him, but he didn't have to stay with me all his life. It was time for Friday to start his own family. I was happy he found a good woman. I was happy when I saw they were in love. I respected Friday's decision to stay on the island with his woman. I walked around the island a lot. I wanted to visit all the places I knew from my life on the island. I had some favorite places, for example the Fruit Valley. I spent a lot of time there. I liked this place very much. My son liked the island too. He often walked around the island with me. I told him many other stories about my life here. We stayed on the island for 20 days. Then the ship from Havana came. It was time to leave. We said goodbye to Friday and his people. When we left the island, I had a strange feeling. I also felt tears in my eyes. I liked this place very much. It was my home for a long time. I thought, I will never see this place again.